Friends, if you want to watch super hit movie Terminator in English, then you must like this video if you are visiting our channel for the first time. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, friends. In today's video, the movie we are going to talk about is called Terminator. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it all. Interesting facts about this movie. In today's video, I am going to tell you. I am also going to give you all the information on which OTT platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production filming, post-production budget, box office collection of this film. We will also talk about the story of this film. And I will also give you a small review of the story of this film. Apart from this, we will discuss about the facts of this film's storyline, star cast actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the end. So let's start the video. Terminator is an American media franchise created by James Cameron and Gail Ann Hurd. It is considered to be of the cyberpunk subgenre of science fiction. The franchise primarily focuses on a post-apocalyptic war between a synthetic intelligence known as Skynet and a surviving resistance of humans led by John Connor. Skynet fights with an arsenal of cyborgs known as Terminators, designed to mimic humans and infiltrate the resistance. A prominent model throughout the films is the T-800, commonly known as the Terminator and portrayed by Arnold Schwarzenegger. Time travel is a common aspect of the franchise, with humans and Terminators often sent back to alter the past and change the outcome of the future. The franchise began with the 1984 film The Terminator, written and directed by Cameron, with Hurd as producer. They would return for the 1991 sequel, Terminator 2: Judgment Day, or T2. Both films were critical and commercial successes. Subsequent installments, most of them produced without Cameron's involvement, saw less positive reviews and diminishing box office returns. Terminator 3: Rise of the Machines was released in 2003, followed by Terminator Salvation in 2009. Salvation was intended as the first in a new trilogy, which was later scrapped after the film rights were sold. Cameron was consulted for the 2015 film Terminator Genisys, a reboot branching off from the timeline of the original film. It was negatively received and performed poorly at the box office. Cameron had a larger role as a producer of the 2019 film Terminator Dark Fate, a sequel to T2 that ignores the three preceding films. Genisys and Dark Fate, respectively, were also produced as the first installment in a planned trilogy, but both were canceled due to poor box office performances. Franchise rights. Before the first film was created, director James Cameron sold the rights for $1 to Gail Ann Hurd, his future wife, who produced the film, under the strict provision that he be allowed to direct it. 10. Hemdale Film Corporation also became a 50% owner of the franchise rights until its share was sold in 1990 to Carol Co. Pictures, a company founded by Andrew G. Vajna and Mario Kassar. Terminator 2: Judgment Day was released a year later. 11. Carolco filed for bankruptcy in 1995, and its library was subsequently acquired by Studio Canal, which continues to own the franchise today. However, the rights to future Terminator films were ultimately put up for auction. By that time, Cameron had become interested in making a Terminator 3 film. The rights were ultimately auctioned to Vajna in 1997 for $8 million. Vajna and Kassar spent another $8 million to purchase Hurd's half of the rights in 1998, becoming the full owners of the franchise. Hurd was initially opposed to the sale of the rights, while Cameron had lost interest in the franchise and a third film. After the 2003 release of Terminator 3: Rise of the Machines, the franchise rights were sold in 2007 for about $25 million to the Halcyon Company, 1819, which produced Terminator Salvation in 2009. Later that year, the company faced legal issues and filed for bankruptcy, putting the franchise rights up for sale. The rights were valued at about $70 million. In 2010, the rights were sold for $29.5 million to Pacificor, a hedge fund that was Halcyon's largest creditor. In 2012, the rights were sold to Megan Ellison and her production company Annapurna Pictures for less than $20 million, a lower price than what was previously offered. The low price was because of the possibility of Cameron regaining the rights in 2019 as a result of new North American copyright laws. Megan's brother David Ellison and Skydance Productions produced Terminator Genisys in 2015. Cameron worked together with David Ellison to produce the 2019 film Terminator: Dark Fate. As the film neared its release, Hurd filed to terminate a copyright grant made 35 years earlier. Under this move, Hurd would again become a 50% owner of the rights, with Cameron and Skydance could lose the rights to make any additional Terminator films beginning in November 2020, unless a new deal is worked out. Skydance responded that it had a deal in place with Cameron and that it controls the rights to the Terminator franchise for the foreseeable future. The Terminator, 1984. The Terminator is a 1984 science fiction action film released by Orion Pictures, co-written and directed by James Cameron and starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, Linda Hamilton, and Michael Biehn. It is the first work in the Terminator franchise. In the film, robots take over the world in the near future, directed by the artificial intelligence Skynet. With its sole mission to completely annihilate humanity, it develops android assassins called Terminators that outwardly appear human. A man named John Connor starts the TechCom resistance to fight the machines, defeat Skynet, and free humanity. With a human victory imminent, the machine's only choice is to send a Terminator back in time to kill John's mother, Sarah Connor, and prevent the boy's birth, thereby stopping the resistance from being founded in the first place. With the fate of humanity at stake, John sends soldier Kyle Reese back to protect Sarah Connor and thus ensure his own existence. It was released on October 26, 1984 and grossed $78.4 million worldwide. Terminator 2: Judgment Day, 1991. Terminator 2: Judgment Day is the 1991 sequel to the original Terminator film and was released by TriStar Pictures. It was co-written, directed, and produced by James Cameron and stars Arnold Schwarzenegger, Linda Hamilton, Edward Furlong, Robert Patrick, and Joe Morton. After robots fail to prevent John Connor from being born, they try again in 1995, this time attempting to terminate him as a child by using a more advanced Terminator, the T-1000. As before, John sends back a protector for his younger self, a reprogrammed Terminator who is a doppelganger to the one from 1984. After years of preparing for the future war, Sarah decides to use the same tactics the robots used on her, preventing Skynet from being invented by destroying Cyberdyne systems before they create it. Terminator 2: Judgment Day was released on July 3, 1991 to critical acclaim, becoming the most successful film at the U.S. box office in 1991, 27, and grossing $523.7 million worldwide. It won several Academy Awards, one most notably for its groundbreaking computer animation. The film was remastered for 3D and re-released in August 2017. Terminator 3: Rise of the Machines, 2003. Terminator 3: Rise of the Machines, released by Warner Bros. Pictures in North America and Columbia TriStar Film Distributors internationally, is the 2003 sequel to Terminator 2 and is written by John Brancato, Michael Ferris, directed by Jonathan Mostow, and starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, Nick Stahl, Claire Danes, and Kristanna Loken. As a result of the destruction of Cyberdyne, the Skynet takeover has been postponed, not averted. In an attempt to ensure a victory by the robots, a new Terminator, the TX, is sent back to terminate as many of John Connor's future lieutenants as possible, including his future wife Kate Brewster, and also John himself. Kate's father, General Robert Brewster, David Andrews, who is supervising Skynet's development, is also targeted for termination by the TX. After Connor's future self is terminated by a doppelganger of his previous protector, Kate reprograms him and sends him back to save them both from the TX. It was released on July 2, 2003 to generally favorable reviews and grossed $433.4 million worldwide. Terminator Salvation, 2009. Terminator Salvation is the fourth installment of the Terminator film series, produced by the Halcyon Company and distributed by Warner Bros. Pictures and Columbia Pictures. It was released on May 21, 2009, to negative reviews and grossed $371.4 million. It was written by John Brancato and Michael Ferris, directed by Majid 28. and stars Christian Bale as John Connor and Sam Worthington, who is personally recommended by James Cameron, as Marcus Wright. Following the events of Terminator 3: Rise of the Machines, after Skynet has destroyed much of humanity in a nuclear holocaust, John struggles to become the leader of humanity as he is destined, while Marcus Wright finds his place in an unfamiliar post-apocalyptic world. In this future, altered by the events of the second film, the T-800 Terminators, Roland Kickinger with CG-rendered facial likeness of Arnold Schwarzenegger, are coming online sooner than expected. The film also stars Anton Yelchin as Kyle Reese, Bryce Dallas Howard, Moon Bloodgood, Common, Michael Ironside, and Helena Bonham Carter. Terminator Genisys 2015. Terminator Genisys is the fifth installment of the franchise and also serves as a reboot. It features the main characters from the first two films portrayed by a new cast, with the exception of Arnold Schwarzenegger reprising his role as the eponymous character. Additionally, J.K. Simmons joined the cast as Detective O'Brien, serving as an ally for the film's protagonists. The film was written by Leda Kalogridis and Patrick Lussier and directed by Alan Taylor. It was made by Skydance Productions and distributed by Paramount Pictures. The story takes place in an alternate reality resulting from a chain of events related to Skynet's Matt Smith actions throughout a previous timeline. Prior to this alteration, on the verge of winning the war against Skynet, John Connor, Jason Clarke, sends his trusted right-hand officer, Kyle Reese, Jai Courtney, back through time to save his mother's life and ensure his own existence. However, Kyle arrives at an alternate timeline where Skynet had never launched its initial attack in 1997, and Sarah Connor, Emilia Clarke, was brought up by a reprogrammed Terminator, Schwarzenegger, sent by an unknown party to be her guardian ever since childhood. Now Sarah, Kyle, and the Guardian need to escape the T-800 Model 101, Brett Azar with CG-rendered likeness of Schwarzenegger from the first film, the T-1000, Lee Byung-hun, and Skynet's T-3000 in an attempt to stop Judgment Day from ever happening, while trying to uncover the secrets behind Cyberdyne Systems' new application software, Genisys. Assisting the trio is O'Brien, whose investigation into time travelers, especially Terminators, leads him to learn about Skynet and helps the protagonists in their mission to avert Judgment Day. Cameron was consulted for the film during its early development. It was released in the U.S. on July 1, 2015, and grossed $440.6 million worldwide. Its commercial performance was lower than anticipated, resulting in 2 planned sequels and a spin-off television series being canceled in favor of Terminator Dark Fate 2019. Terminator Dark Fate 2019. Terminator Dark Fate is the 6th installment of the franchise and a direct sequel to Terminator 2: Judgment Day. It is directed by Tim Miller and was released in the U.S. on November 1, 2019. It stars Linda Hamilton and Arnold Schwarzenegger, reprising their roles as Sarah Connor and the Terminator, respectively. The film also stars Mackenzie Davis, Natalia Reyes, and Gabriel Luna. Jude Colley and Brett Azar were also cast as a young John Connor and a younger T-800, respectively. The previous film, Terminator Genisys, had been intended as the first in a new standalone film trilogy, but the planned sequels were canceled following the film's disappointing box office performance. The producer of that film, David Ellison, recruited James Cameron to produce a new film with him, which would become Terminator Dark Fate 38, 39, 41. In the film, the machines send a Terminator Rev 9 Luna back in time to eliminate Danny Ramos Reyes, whose destiny is linked to the human resistance's war against them. The Resistance sends one of their soldiers, Grace Davis, back to protect her, and a chain of events leads Grace and Danny to join forces with Sarah Connor and the T-800. The writers' room included Josh Friedman, creator of the television series Terminator: The Sarah Connor Chronicles. Other writers included David S. Goyer, Justin Rhodes, and Billy Ray. The creative team stated that the new film would feature a young 18 to 21-year-old who could potentially lead the franchise should the first film be successful. Miller made mention of creating a theme park attraction akin to T2 3D, Battle Across Time, should the film prove successful. Because the series deals with time travel, The film ignores the premise of the last 3 films in the TV series and is not titled Terminator 6, as it is also a direct sequel to Terminator 2, Judgment Day. Filming began in Isleta del Morro, Almeria, on June 4, 2018, shooting for a month there before shooting the rest in the United States. This film was intended as the first in a new trilogy of Terminator films, but these plans were canceled due to very mixed audience reactions and the film's underperforming box office record. Terminator: The Sarah Connor Chronicles, 2008 to 2009. The Sarah Connor Chronicles follows Sarah, Lena Headey, and John Connor, Thomas Dekker, as they try to live under the radar after destroying Cyberdyne in Terminator 2. Summer Glau plays a Terminator named Cameron, and Brian Austin Green plays Derek Reese, the brother of Kyle Reese, both sent back in time to protect the Connors and prevent another Judgment Day. Terminator Zero, 2024. Terminator Zero is an anime series released on Netflix on August 29, 2024, notably referencing Judgment Day from the films. It is a co-production between Skydance and Production IG. Unlike previous installments, the 8-episode series takes place in Japan, without any ties to Sarah Connor or her son, John, instead focusing on new characters. Future. In December 2022, while promoting Avatar: The Way of Water, producer and director of the first 2 Terminator films, James Cameron revealed that another series reboot was in discussion, but nothing has been decided. The reboot would likely feature an entirely new cast and reset the continuity of the entire film series. Cameron suggested that in hindsight, bringing back both Arnold Schwarzenegger and Linda Hamilton for Terminator: Dark Fate had been a mistake. In May 2023, Schwarzenegger stated in an interview that he would not appear in any future franchise installments after the last few films were not well written. Later that month, it was reported that Cameron was developing a script for a Terminator reboot. In February 2024, Hamilton stated in an interview that she would also not appear in any more future installments, feeling that she did all she could in the franchise and thought the story had been done to death. She also questioned the idea of rebooting the franchise again, stating, "Why anybody would relaunch it is a mystery to me." The Machinima series, 2009. Set in 2016, years after Judgment Day, Blair Williams, voiced by Moon Bloodgood, is fighting the war against the machines in downtown Los Angeles, while tracking down the computer hacker named Laz Howard, voiced by Cam Clark, and trying to persuade him to join sides with the Resistance. Terminator Genesis: The YouTube Chronicles, 2015. Terminator Genesis: The YouTube Chronicles was released in 3 parts on June 22, 2015, to promote the 5th film, produced by Heresy. The web series was directed by Charles Paik and written by Jay Bushman. It features several popular YouTube stars appearing with Arnold Schwarzenegger as the T-800, as they stand together against the T-360, played by fellow YouTube personality Toby Turner. The Terminator spin-off comics. In 1988, Now Comics published an ongoing series with John Connor as the main character in 2031 after sending Kyle Reese back to 1984 to protect his mother. The Terminators in this canon had more human-like endoskeletons, and some issues would deal with subordinates of Connors in the ruins of certain geographic areas. The 17-issue series was followed by 2 limited series. Dark Horse Comics acquired the rights in 1990. In The Terminator, with Tempest added in trade paperbacks to distinguish itself from other comics, a group of human soldiers and 4 Terminators come to the present to stop Skynet in differing ways. In the sequel, Secondary Objectives, the surviving Terminator is reprogrammed to destroy another Terminator sent to aid him and kill Sarah Connor. In its sequel, The Enemy Within, a team of human assassins attempt to return to the past and kill a Skynet developer. The 1992 Endgame concludes this arc. Human Colonel Mary Randall protects Sarah Connor as she goes into labor. Dark Horse published a 1992 one-shot written by James Dale Robinson and drawn by Matt Wagner. Here, a female Terminator and a resistance fighter battle for the life of a woman named Sarah Connor, but not the correct one. The comic book had the unusual feature of a physical pop-up in one scene. A 1993 limited series Hunters and Killers, set during the war, has special Terminators created to impersonate leaders in the Russian resistance, 105. Another limited series, published in 1998, follows the misadventures of two malfunctioning Terminators in Death Valley, 106. This set up the following year's comic The Dark Years, set in 2030. In The Dark Years, a Terminator is sent to eliminate John Connor and his mother in 1999, 107. In 2013, Dark Horse released a sequel comic based on the 2009 film Terminator Salvation, entitled Terminator Salvation: The Final Battle. Malibu Comics published twin series in 1995. One was a sequel to Terminator 2: Judgment Day, in which Sarah and John encounter two Terminators. The other was a prequel that explains the scenario. The conclusions to the series were published in one issue, 109-110. Beckett Comics published 3 series to promote Terminator 3: Rise of the Machines, each consisting of 2 issues. Terminator 2: Infinity, later simply Terminator Infinity, 2007 comic book series by Dynamite Entertainment, was set in 2033. It was, for 2 issues, tied into another one of Dynamite's publications called Painkiller Jane. Dynamite's continuation, Terminator Revolution, and IDW Publishing's Salvation tie-in comic book were legally possible, as the former was specifically based on the Terminator 2 license. Crossover comics, Terminators have crossed over with RoboCop, Superman, and Alien vs. Predator. In RoboCop vs. the Terminator, 1992, and Superman vs. the Terminator, Death to the Future, 2000, the heroes must prevent the war-ravaged future. In 2000's Alien vs. Predator vs. the Terminator from Dark Horse, where Skynet has reactivated farther in the future and is creating an alien-Terminator hybrid. Ellen Ripley's clone from Alien Resurrection and the Predators join forces to stop Skynet. In 2020, Dark Horse and IDW Publishing published Transformers vs. the Terminator, in which the Autobots and the Decepticons are antagonized by the T-800 as Skynet sends the Terminator back through time to destroy the Cybertronians and restore the future timeline. Collectible card game, The Terminator collectible card game. The Terminator collectible card game was released in 2000 by Precedence. First announced in 2020 by Nightfall Games, the Terminator RPG was released in digital form on June 1, 2022, with a physical version following later in the year. The game is based on the first film in Dark Horse Comics line of graphic novels and comics. T2 3D, Battle Across Time, a film ride based on the franchise, opened at Universal Studios Florida in 1996. The ride is presented as the original sequel to Terminator 2: Judgment Day. It features Arnold Schwarzenegger, Linda Hamilton, Edward Furlong, and Robert Patrick reprising their roles as the Terminator, Sarah Connor, John Connor, and the T-1000, respectively. James Cameron was one of 3 directors on the attraction, which marked his last major involvement with the franchise until Terminator: Dark Fate. Terminator Salvation, the ride operated at California's Six Flags Magic Mountain from 2009 to 2010. Terminator X, a laser battle for salvation, operated at various locations beginning in 2009. Terminator Salvation Trilogy. In May 2007, the production rights to the Terminator series had passed from the feuding of Andrew G. Vajna and Mario Casar to the Halcyon Company. The producers of the company hoped to start a new trilogy based on the franchise. However, due to the box office failure of the 4th film and legal troubles, the Salvation Trilogy was ultimately canceled. William Wisher, who co-wrote the first 2 films, had written material for a potential Terminator 5 and Terminator 6 that would follow on from the events of Terminator Salvation. The 2-part story would involve an element of time travel that brings back the deceased character of Sarah Connor, allowing her to interact with Kyle Reese beyond their initial meeting in the first film. Schwarzenegger would also reprise his role for the 6th film. The films would also include new Terminator villains from Skynet. Wisher had written a 24-page film treatment for Terminator 5 and a 4-page concept outline for Terminator 6. Terminator Genisys Trilogy. By December 2013, there were plans for Terminator Genisys to be the start of a new trilogy of films. In September 2014, Paramount announced release dates for the 2 Genisys sequels, May 19, 2017, and June 29, 2018. Terminator Genesis producer David Ellison described the film and its intended trilogy as standalone projects based on Cameron's original Terminator films. Ellison stated, "Terminator Genesis is neither a sequel or a prequel to the previous films," saying, "For us, this is Terminator 1. This is not Terminator 5." The sequels to Genesis were tentatively known as Terminator 2 and Terminator 3. The two sequels were to be filmed back-to-back during 9 months of continuous shooting. The storylines for the two sequels were devised by Genesis writers Calogridis and Lucier. The trilogy was being planned out before Terminator Genesis began filming, as producers David Ellison and Dana Goldberg wanted the full storyline finished ahead of time rather than having to figure it out as you go along, stating, "We spent a lot of time breaking that down, and we do know what the last line of the third movie is, should we be lucky enough to get to make it." Production on the sequels was contingent on whether Terminator Genesis would be successful. Development of the trilogy stalled in 2015 after the film's disappointing box office performance. The planned sequels were ultimately canceled, with Terminator 2 being removed from Paramount's release schedule in January 2016. The new trilogy would have explained who sent Pops back in time to protect Sarah Connor, second film in the trilogy, with filming set to begin in 2016. Jai Courtney and Matt Smith would also reprise their respective roles as Kyle Reese in Skynet, 141-142. J.K. Simmons would have had further involvement in the new trilogy, 139. And Dio Okene would have a significant role reprising his character Danny Dyson in the second film, which would have focused on John Connor's life after becoming part machine. Jason Clarke said about the canceled Genesis sequel, "What I remember was that second one was going to be about John's journey after he was taken by Skynet, like going down to what he became, half machine, half man. That's where the second one was going to start, and that's about all I knew. It's such a bummer we didn't get to do that." Terminator Genesis connected television series. By December 2013, Skydance Productions and Annapurna Pictures were developing a new Terminator television series. Ashley Miller and Zach Stentz, who had worked together on Terminator: The Sarah Connor Chronicles, were named as writers and executive producers. The series was to deviate from the franchise's history at a critical moment in 1984's The Terminator and would also integrate with the planned sequels to Terminator Genesis. Terminator Dark Fate trilogy. Plans for a new Terminator film trilogy were announced in July 2017. While working on the story for Terminator Dark Fate that year, Cameron and the writers envisioned the film as the first in the new trilogy. They also worked out the basic storylines for each planned film. In October 2019, Cameron stated that sequels to Terminator Dark Fate would further explore the relationship between humans and artificial intelligence, while stating that a resolution between the two feuding sides would be the ultimate outcome. That month, Schwarzenegger stated that Cameron would write the Terminator Dark Fate sequels and that Cameron would begin work on the next film in early 2020 for release in 2022. Although the events of Terminator Dark Fate erase Schwarzenegger's T-800 character from existence, Cameron did not rule out the possibility of Schwarzenegger reprising the character. "Look, if we make a shit ton of money with this film, Terminator Dark Fate, and the cards say that they like Arnold, I think Arnold can come back. I'm a writer. I can think of scenarios. We don't have a plan for that right now. Let me put it that way." Natalia Reyes was to reprise her role for a sequel. Hamilton stated in October that she would probably reprise her role as well, although she joked that she would fake her own death to avoid appearing in it, saying that making Terminator Dark Fate really was hard because of the physical training she had to undergo. Hamilton later said that she would be happy not to star in another Terminator film, but she kept the possibility open, with a potential exception being that a sequel be done on a smaller scale and budget. Dark Fate director Tim Miller stated in November that he did not expect to return for a sequel. Production of a sequel was contingent on whether Dark Fate was a box office success. Following the underwhelming performance of Dark Fate at the box office, with an estimated loss of at least $120 million, Sources close to Skydance told The Hollywood Reporter that there are no plans for further films, effectively canceling the planned Dark Fate trilogy. Growing up in the 90s, I was glued to cable TV, and Terminator was one of those titles that was always around. I remember seeing Arnold Schwarzenegger donning his leather jacket and shades and saying the iconic phrase, "I'll be back," and thinking that he was the coolest guy I've ever seen. For years, I have been fascinated with Kyle Reese's apocalyptic future, where John Connor was the hero of the rebellion against an army of machines. But when this mythologized future finally came to fruition in Terminator Salvation, it was a major letdown that lowered my expectations for future installments. Salvation had all the makings of a perfect Terminator movie. It had a strong cast, a highly anticipated premise, and a chance to explore new stories within this world that was already loved by many. The marketing angled it to be the definitive look into John Connor's dark future. Unfortunately, Terminator Salvation was a major disappointment, missing the mark on multiple fronts and leaving me yearning for what could have been. My true love for the franchise began when my grandma allowed me to watch Terminator 2 Judgment Day on HBO, and I have been hooked ever since. I used to pretend I was young John Connor riding on the back of a motorcycle with my personal T-800. When Terminator Salvation was announced, I was ecstatic at the promise of seeing John Connor, portrayed by Christian Bale, in his prime as the leader of the Resistance. This movie was supposed to bridge the gap between the glimpses of the apocalyptic future and the full-scale battles hinted at throughout the series. It's been a while since I have been excited about a new Terminator installment, and these future titles have the potential to explore more within this world and even possibly correct some of the series' previous mistakes. If these titles could give the story time to develop the characters, capturing the emotional and physical toll of war, they would be miles ahead of some of the previous attempts. By focusing on the more human elements of this story, Terminator 7 and 0 could capture the essence of what made the original Terminator films so impactful. As the Terminator franchise continues to evolve, there is still a chance to revisit this captivating storyline in a way that honors its legacy and completes the story dreamed up by my inner child. By learning from the missteps of Terminator Salvation and embracing a more focused and character-driven approach, future installments could finally bring the epic saga of John Connor and the human resistance to life in a manner that is worthy of the fabled war between man and machine. Growing up in the 90s, I was glued to cable TV, and Terminator was one of those titles that was always around. I remember seeing Arnold Schwarzenegger donning his leather jacket and shades and saying the iconic phrase, "I'll be back," and thinking that he was the coolest guy I've ever seen. For years, I have been fascinated with Kyle Reese's apocalyptic future, where John Connor was the hero of the rebellion against an army of machines. But when this mythologized future finally came to fruition in Terminator Salvation, it was a major letdown that lowered my expectations for future installments. Salvation had all the makings of a perfect Terminator movie. It had a strong cast, a highly anticipated premise, and a chance to explore new stories within this world that was already loved by many. The marketing angled it to be the definitive look into John Connor's dark future. Unfortunately, Terminator Salvation was a major disappointment, missing the mark on multiple fronts and leaving me yearning for what could have been. My true love for the franchise began when my grandma allowed me to watch Terminator 2 Judgment Day on HBO, and I have been hooked ever since. I used to pretend I was young John Connor riding on the back of a motorcycle with my personal T-800. When Terminator Salvation was announced, I was ecstatic at the promise of seeing John Connor, portrayed by Christian Bale, in his prime as the leader of the Resistance. This movie was supposed to bridge the gap between the glimpses of the apocalyptic future and the full-scale battles hinted at throughout the series. It's been a while since I have been excited about a new Terminator installment, and these future titles have the potential to explore more within this world and even possibly correct some of the series' previous mistakes. If these titles could give the story time to develop the characters, capturing the emotional and physical toll of war, they would be miles ahead of some of the previous attempts. By focusing on the more human elements of this story, Terminator 7 and 0 could capture the essence of what made the original Terminator films so impactful. As the Terminator franchise continues to evolve, there is still a chance to revisit this captivating storyline in a way that honors its legacy and completes the story dreamed up by my inner child. By learning from the missteps of Terminator Salvation and embracing a more focused and character-driven approach, future installments could finally bring the epic saga of John Connor and the human resistance to life in a manner that is worthy of the fabled war between man and machine. So in Terminator's beginning is his end, and in his time travel action franchise is the ending that brings him back round to another beginning, basically replaying the famous elements from T1 and T2 with some new actors, new twists, newish attitudes to sexual politics, famous lines slightly changed, "Come with me or you'll be dead in 30 seconds," and with Arnie himself good-humoredly assuming a wise old-timer attitude, like a cyborg Grandpa Walton. You won't see the Terminator franchise anywhere near the lineup of upcoming 2025 movies, as James Cameron's franchise is still in cinematic stasis. It's not hard to see why, as we're approaching the 5th anniversary of Dark Fate's horrific box office performance, and those results still have fans smarting. More recently, that film's director, Tim Miller, weighed in on why he thought the 6th entry in the series bombed. Simultaneously, his comments only led me to think more about what the recent Netflix series Terminator Zero did so well. What's Tim Miller's explanation for why Terminator Dark Fate bombed? As the man behind Prime Video's upcoming animated anthology Secret Level was visiting Italy's Lucca Comic and Games Festival, Variety was on hand to interview him about the project. His latest production is a collection of stories based on existing video game IP, so the subject of adaptation was firmly in view during the chat. That led to Tim Miller making these comments on his approach to Terminator Dark Fate and the fallout that ensued. "I'm a nerd, so I'm trying to do what I would want to see as a nerd. Now, my Terminator movie didn't exactly set the world on fire, even though I approached it with that principle, which goes to show. Nobody sets out to disregard someone's closely held childhood dreams. It's no cause for vitriol. A lot of people didn't like Terminator Dark Fate for reasons I had nothing to do with. One, because it was the 6th film, and another because we killed John Connor at the start. But if Jim Cameron wants that to happen, which I agree with, by the way, then that's what you do." Anyone who followed the drama surrounding the most recent chapter in the Connor family legacy likely knows the stories about Tim Miller's Terminator disagreements with James Cameron. And, while the two parties seem to have mended fences, they're definitely not on the same page about where Dark Fate went wrong. At the same time, civility still reigns in this tale of conflicting cases. For Miller, the big swing of killing John Connor in the film's prologue seems to be where things went awry. Meanwhile, James Cameron's blunt Dark Fate thoughts, which were shared earlier this year, put the blame on audiences not showing up. The thematic disagreements of the past are still in place, but at least the discussion still feels like it's on the more pleasant side of things. While this isn't as contentious as the more heated stories that came out of the production, there's clearly still a bit of a disconnect between both men. That gulf of opinion is also what allows me to once again talk about how good Terminator Zero is, which is an opportunity I'll always take someone up on. One late-night showing on HBO was all it took for me to fall in love with the Terminator. My love of sci-fi, especially stories with robots and time travel involved, was a consequence of watching this tale of trying to beat back Armageddon, and I'll forever be thankful for that. So when showrunner/writer Mattson Tomlin and director Masashi Kudo were confirmed to be developing an anime set in that universe, I was kind of skeptical after remembering my own distaste for Dark Fate's story. I couldn't have been more wrong for having those feelings, especially after Terminator Zero's trailer made Judgment Day look even more horrifying. Last year's table-clearing Halloween sequel radically ditched decades of, admittedly inept, franchise lore, and perhaps more relevant to the Terminator series, X-Men Days of Future Past famously jettisoned several execrable movies via timey-wimey shenanigans. Terminator Dark Fate, then, has been hailed as franchise creator James Cameron's return to the fold, receiving producer and story-by credits here, and a supposed return to the form of Cameron's last foray, the legendary Terminator 2 Judgment Day, to which this film is a direct sequel. And while the 6th entry into the series is a marked improvement over the risible Terminator Salvation and Terminator Genesis, it's tough to shake the feeling that Cameron and director Tim Miller, Deadpool, are dining out a little too voraciously on Cameron's sci-fi action masterpiece. Fans will have to ask themselves where the line between homage and cheeky self-cribbing is drawn, and whether they're content to settle for a warmed-over retread of a classic film you could just watch instead. Dark Fate takes place almost 30 years after T2, with young Mexican Daniela Ramos, Natalia Reyes, the newest target of a murderous robot, Rev 9, Gabriel Luna, which has the ability to split itself in two for greater combat efficiency. But as an attempt on her life is made, Danny is saved by Grace, Mackenzie Davis, a nifty new Terminator sent from the future to protect her, along with a returning Sarah Connor, Linda Hamilton, who has her own urgent motivations for helping to save Danny's life. It's tough to gauge how this movie will play for fans who have patiently been waiting for a Terminator movie which isn't either miserable or stupid, because while Dark Fate is neither of those things, it's also a near paradoxical mix of bold and disappointingly safe. An instigating incident in the film is sure to send shockwaves throughout the fanbase, a rearrangement of the chessboard which, while brave, feels so utterly perfunctory to its commercial aims that some may feel it undermines the very essence of the first two movies. Indeed, it's probably fair to consider Dark Fate something between a sequel and a reboot, for while it is a continuity follow-up to T2, the aggressiveness with which it rejigs the established lore, while basically recycling T2's plot and action, scarcely makes it feel like a true sequel. If some may embrace the film as a kinetic love letter to T2, just as many are likely to take umbrage with the fairly empty, low-calorie callbacks to major action beats, dialogues, and even precise shots from the series' best entry. At least 3 or 4 set pieces in the movie skim an indecent amount from T2. In particular, there's a car chase that's basically the second film's Viaduct Chase 2.0, and a finale that nods a little too eagerly to the iconic steel mill showdown. Yet none of the action in Dark Fate captures the efficient, tactile energy of Cameron's 2 originals. Even a film as exuberant and outlandish as T2 feels restrained compared to this, which overdoses on jerky, daft-looking physics-defying action with blurry, video game-esque CGI approximations of our principal heroes. Miller's shot selections are basically fine enough, but there's absolutely nothing here that sticks to the ribs viscerally or otherwise. Even taken on purely its own terms as a chase movie, outside of the action, Miller's film is handicapped by a ho-hum script which does just right enough by franchise heroine Sarah Connor, yet overburdens itself with explaining away its own wonky non-logic, and deploying some progressive flourishes which, while inherently welcome, are laid on toe-curlingly thick. The simplicity of protect the girl, save the world, juxtaposed with Sarah's own anguished existence, are plenty to carry the movie in between its glossy set pieces. Yet quite unexpectedly, the inclusion of Arnold Schwarzenegger's T-800, or as he's known here, Carl, proves to be one of the film's real storytelling missteps. As charming as Schwarzenegger is here as a more domesticated character, he's dropped into the movie with all the grace and necessity of, well, a 400-pound machine, and the storytelling gymnastics required to explain his presence are, to put it lightly, howlingly silly. The film somewhat smartly doesn't overuse Arnie, though, and above all else, he's growing into his older looks wonderfully. What keeps the film never less than watchable, however, is uniformly its tripartite cast of female leads. Hamilton, if back to the franchise under questionable auspices, is emotionally and physically plausible as the no-bullshit, 3 decades later Sarah Connor, certainly lending her a more dignified arc than the off-screen death and voiceover cameo she received in the 3rd and 4th films respectively. Mackenzie Davis is also magnetic, pun intended, as the new heroic guardian character. Her slender frame counter to the typical rendition of a Terminator, even T3's curvaceous TX, Kristana Loken, while her character's unique physiology provides a just unique enough wrinkle to keep her interesting. If a plot element regarding her conditioning feels rather contrived, she needs to periodically consume drugs to sustain her metabolism, Davis's physical commitment to the part can't be denied. And while Natalia Reyes' new future hope proxy Danny is underwritten, considering her gravity in reshaping the series' continuity, Reyes is easy to warm to and neither bunny-stunned to the point of comedy nor implausibly battle-ready. If Dark Fate does indeed lead to a new trilogy as Cameron is hoping, there's clear potential for her to lead the way, no matter the film's many narrative misgivings. Sadly, less good can be said for Gabriel Luna's Rev 9. For, while the part doesn't want for Luna's efforts, The shiny new Terminator just isn't much interesting, and can't even match the most basic, imposing dread of Robert Patrick's T-1000. The added allure of an R rating does at least allow the killer cyborg to bore its way through fleets of humans with its bladed hands in gloriously gory fashion. But the character's reliance on goofy, over-stylized CGI makes him feel less a practical threat and more a cartoon character. If many are already hailing Dark Fate as the best Terminator movie since T2, that feels a touch disingenuous to 2003's Terminator 3: Rise of the Machines, which, while itself a major step down from the first two films, at least felt like a sequel that built on, rather than undermined, its predecessors. More to the point, it had the courage of its convictions to commit to a haunting downer of an ending, while this film, in all of its over-reliance on existing tropes and iconography, feels rather gutless as a successor. But Cameron and co. do at least deserve a measure of praise for finally ironing out the series' tone, which has been on the iffy skids since T3. Dark Fate certainly appreciates the fanbase's desire for a side order of gallows humor alongside the drama and action, rather than, well, Arnie wearing Elton John sunglasses. Terminator: Dark Fate is an avatar for the series' overpowering identity crisis. It wants to provide an off-ramp for new possibilities, all while shackling itself to what came before by way of half-baked homages. Cameron can surely do better, though, than dubiously motivated fan service, aggressively playing whack-a-mole with all the nostalgia receptors in your brain. And above all else, is the film's status as the fourth best Terminator really worth celebrating? James Cameron really likes Terminator: Dark Fate, but he knows why the movie flopped at the box office. Released on November 1st, 2019, Terminator: Dark Fate was the sixth film in the Terminator franchise and a follow-up to Terminator 2: Judgment Day that ignored the previous sequels. Not only did Arnold Schwarzenegger return as the Terminator, but Linda Hamilton also returned to the role of Sarah Connor after 28 years, and with James Cameron returning to the franchise as a producer, it seemed like a recipe for success. Despite the best reviews in the franchise since T2, Dark Fate became a major box office bomb, grossing only $62 million domestically on a budget of $185 million. Even the $261 million wasn't enough to save Dark Fate, which grossed well below less-loved sequels like Terminator Genesis and Terminator Salvation. Speaking with Empire magazine about the Terminator's 40th anniversary, James Cameron touched upon Terminator: Dark Fate's box office. Cameron defended the movie and gave particular praise to Gabriel Luna's Rev 9 Terminator. "I think the Rev 9 was cool as shit. Personally, I think that's as good as anything that we did back then," said Cameron. "I still think mine are the best, but I put it in solid third." The issue Cameron sees, however, is in putting so much emphasis on the return of Sarah Connor and Schwarzenegger's Terminator. Cameron said, With Terminator: Dark Fate hitting digital release and home video, Men's Journal has an exclusive look at how one of those action scenes came together. An airplane battle that ends with a Humvee falling to the ground, with the main characters in it. In this scene, the characters are in a C-5 airplane as Schwarzenegger's T-800 fights and tries to hold off Luna's Rev-9 so that Sarah Connor, Hamilton, Grace, Mackenzie Davis, and Danny, Natalia Reyes, can escape. They pile into a Humvee that's rigged for a parachute drop from the plane, but naturally things don't go according to plan, and that's where the action comes in. As Miller describes, when it bails out of the plane, the parachutes aren't deployed and they're in free fall, Miller says. And Grace, being the super soldier she is, she climbs outside and releases the parachutes and saves everybody. The Terminator clip video shows the way the stunt team trained with Davis to move in the scene and how they designed the sets and studio space to actually film it. Using a combination of a real Humvee, the design of the back of the plane, wire work with Davis, and computer graphics for the sky, the crew put together one of the most thrilling action sequences of the year. Osiris is written by William Kaufman and Paul Reichelt, and directed by William Kaufman, The Channel. Max Martini, Pacific Rim, Brianna Hildebrand, Deadpool franchise, LaMonica Garrett, Special Ops, Lioness, and Linda Hamilton, the Terminator star. In the film, a team of Special Forces commandos are in the middle of an operation when they're abducted by a mysterious spacecraft. When they wake up aboard the ship, they quickly discover they are being hunted by a merciless alien race. Kaufman started his career directing the cult hit Sinners and Saints and has also directed The Channel, Shrapnel, Daylight's End, and The Hit List. XYZ Films is the perfect partner who shares our sentiment for iconic alien thrillers, much like we all grew up with, standing in line at the theaters to watch with state-of-the-art creature designs and visual effects that thrill audiences everywhere. We didn't hold back our nostalgia for the genre, and teaming up again with Max Martini alongside the legendary Linda Hamilton was a huge gift for this movie. We can't wait to show the world and wrap post-production this spring, said the producers. Paul Reichelt serves as executive producer, and the film was produced by John Wroblewski and Christian Sosa of Roosevelt Film Lab, Andrew and Isaac Lewis of Denton Film, and Max Martini. The film completed shooting in New Orleans late last year. XYZ Films will introduce the film to international buyers at the upcoming European film market in Berlin. The Terminator franchise has been DOA for many fans ever since 2003's T3, The Rise of the Machines, which then led to clunkers like Terminator Salvation and Terminator Genesis. There was some hope that James Cameron, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Linda Hamilton returning for 2019's Terminator Dark Fate would reignite the franchise, but mediocre reviews and terrible box office, it lost $120 million, turned it into a massive disappointment. Speaking with Empire, Cameron is now defending Dark Fate, which he calls cracking, although he does note that it still doesn't match the first two movies. Regardless, he places it in third place as far as Terminator movies go. I still think mine are the best, but I put it in solid third. Personally, I think that's as good as anything that we did back then. We achieved our goal. We made a legit sequel to a movie where the people that were actually going to theaters at the time that movie came out are all either dead, retired, crippled, or have dementia. It was a non-starter. There was nothing in the movie for a new audience. Our problem was not that the film didn't work. The problem was people didn't show up. I've owned this to Tim Miller many times. I said I torpedoed that movie before we ever wrote a word or shot a foot of film. Tim Miller was hired by Cameron to direct Dark Fate, and the goal was to pretend the other films were a bad dream by making it a sequel to 1991's T2, Judgment Day. Cameron infamously had creative differences with Miller during production and post-production on the film, calling his clashes with Miller in the editing room a bloodbath with many disagreements. He went on to add that the blood is still being scrubbed off the walls from those creative battles. Cameron told Cinema Blend he had seen Miller's rough cut, and it was pretty rough. It was pretty long. The movie transformed in the editing room as Cameron worked with Miller and producer David Ellison to find the best film that could emerge from the rough cut. I felt there were a lot of pathways that were taken that were unnecessary. I'm an editor myself, so I gave notes that were both broad and very specific. I continued in that process up to about 2.5 months ago when we locked picture. I was very involved in the writing and I was very involved in the cutting of the film. And to me, the cutting is really an extension of the writing. Do you agree with Cameron? Where does Dark Fate rank in your Terminator movie ranking? While the first two films are practically untouchable, I'd actually place Rise of the Machines at number 3 instead of Dark Fate. The sixth installment of the Terminator film franchise, Terminator Dark Fate 2019, is an American science fiction action film directed by Tim Miller and written by David Goyer and Billy Ray from a story by James Cameron, Charles Egley, and Josh Friedman. Starring Linda Hamilton as Sarah Connor and Arnold Schwarzenegger as the T-800 Terminator, respectively, reuniting the actors after 28 years. The movie takes place 27 years after the events of the second Terminator film. One of the key characters is Sarah Connor, and the half-human, half-cyborg Grace, Mackenzie Davis, who both have to defend a girl called Dani Ramos, Natalia Reyes, from dying. If anything happens to her, or if she dies, humanity will cease to exist. Skynet this time sends a Rev-9-type Terminator back to the past, and that is what they have to keep away from her. To their help, there will be everyone's favorite, T-800. The filming crew arrived in Hungary on July 19, 2018. Filming locations here included Origo Film Studios. This is where they made the C-5 plane scene. This sequence involves the characters floating in the fuselage in zero gravity. This set piece was the largest ever built. It was made on an 85-ton gimbal. The whole dream was turned into reality by special effects supervisor Neil Corbould. In the city of Komarom at the old Nokia factory is where the scenes for the detention center were filmed. In September 2018, filming took place at the Mercedes-Benz factory in Kecskemét. The movie was released on October 23, 2019 in Europe and on November 1, 2019 in the United States of America. Major movie franchises such as Ghostbusters and Star Wars have been targeted by misogynistic internet trolls in recent years for prominently featuring female characters in leading roles. James Cameron's Terminator franchise has long been dominated by one of cinema's greatest female characters, Sarah Connor, Linda Hamilton, and the upcoming reboot Terminator Dark Fate triples down on leading women by casting Hamilton opposite Mackenzie Davis and Natalia Reyes. Trolls started bashing the film the minute Paramount debuted key art depicting all 3 women together. For director Tim Miller, that misogynistic backlash is meaningless. Major movie franchises such as Ghostbusters and Star Wars have been targeted by misogynistic internet trolls in recent years for prominently featuring female characters in leading roles. James Cameron's Terminator franchise has long been dominated by one of cinema's greatest female characters, Sarah Connor, Linda Hamilton, and the upcoming reboot, Terminator Dark Fate, triples down on leading women by casting Hamilton opposite Mackenzie Davis and Natalia Reyes. Trolls started bashing the film the minute Paramount debuted key art depicting all 3 women together. For director Tim Miller, that misogynistic backlash is meaningless. I can still vaguely remember the night I had sat in a cramped IMAX theater for years ago, where I posed a pivotal question. Should the Terminator franchise be dead and done for? Is it about time? Only the original and its immediate sequel have proven its staying power. The latter 2 films are nothing more than underwhelming. And Genesis, the then most recent entry, had shown the steam tanks were tapped dry. Not everyone would want yet another sequel. That is unless it were to bring the mom back with all the badassery she could manage. That's exactly what director Tim Miller strives for in Terminator Dark Fate, a sequel whose place in the timeline is a more direct connection to James Cameron's original 2 masterpieces. Essentially, Rise of the Machines, Salvation, or Genesis are now either non-canon, alternate timeline fodder, or non-existent in your memory, dependent on who you're talking to. However it's spun, retconning is still retconning. Normally I'd be against it. Here I can let it slide even if the product still ends with a sour flavor on the tongue. Sarah Connor, Linda Hamilton, cannot catch a break in her life, always needing to make her present far better than her awkward, disastrous past. Having dealt with the infamous rogues of T-800s and the looming presence of Skynet for many years and timelines, the last thing she'd crave is having to eradicate a new model of enemy who can't be eliminated as easily. Yet it's her bread and butter, roving around North America to shoot out the stragglers. That's when she crosses paths with a new nonpartisan soldier named Grace Mackenzie Davis. She's a bit of a special case as an enhanced human, as strong as they come in a fight, but impossibly vulnerable with enough open wounds. Her mission's simple: track down a rogue Rev-9 Terminator, Gabriel Luna, traveling from the future to eliminate a random subject just south of the border. Dani Natalia Reyes is in for the weirdest day of her life, the moment she, Grace, and later Sarah cross paths to stay one step ahead of this dangerous threat. It's not at all easy for any of them, protecting the present on the wildest goose chase, while saving the future from damage that cannot be reversed. And of course, that does require some ingenuity, a lot of bad humor, illegal border crossing, and Arnold Schwarzenegger returning to one of his most iconic roles to essentially save the third act. If you know these movies, then easy to admit the formula is unchanged if the scenarios vary to extreme lengths. Surely your appreciation toward this series and its decreasing vitriol for continuity is more substantial than what I could openly admit to. The value of time travel and exposing hidden secrets has remained consistent, if not grown by a high leap here. Sci-fi ethical quandaries are still a star attraction, something Cameron's watchful eyes can gleefully enforce. And yet, with all the names attached to this screenplay, you couldn't notice exactly when it was trying to be profound and earth-shattering. Dark Fate carried an initial treatment by Cameron, which Charles Egley, Murder One, Josh Friedman, The Sarah Connor Chronicles, Justin Rhodes, Grassroots, and most notoriously David Goyer, Krypton, would punch up, build upon, and ultimately downgrade into a jumble. It's not that it is incoherent. The experience never went that terribly. There were just some moments where, through the talents of those 4 script doctors, I was wondering whether I could truly take this sci-fi feature seriously. Long story short, I really couldn't. Between all the unintentional humor and army of MacGuffins, there was no chance to be properly found. The film does say a lot for morality in future tech, and the downsides of where immigration reform has failed us, lending to one of the most anarchic scenes at the midway point. Both are really nothing more MacGuffins, and Luna their unfortunate patron saint, where he's essentially portraying a gag character. Nothing that would be considered legitimate or iconic in the same vein as Arnold would be in all his incarnations as the old-school T-800. The girl power dynamic led by the badass Miss Hamilton, that's perhaps where Dark Fate best excels at. Her presence in the franchise has been no less present, but not so much at the forefront since T2, when the men seemed to rule the show, Arnold and the snot-nosed kid version of Sarah's kid John. Finally, further proof positive that the central conflict always lied with motherly instinct. Make no mistake, Hamilton makes a triumphant return as the mama hen with a shotgun, all fired up with an aching desire, working off random text messages to establish her next kill. Davis is an easygoing delight, thinking with a positive conscience as well as a fragile vulnerability. And the deeper we go into her backstory, one riddled with a few shocking secrets, the kind that could have one cheering almost, the more fondness we could build. Do not be surprised if that were to happen to you, despite some small Alita-esque similarities. It's Miss Reyes, the Colombian-born actress who had made some waves earlier this year in Birds of Passage, that perhaps delivers the strongest revelation. Making her formal American acting debut with little fanfare but plenty of built-in buzz, she's an otherwise well-kept secret, whose stock as a level-headed, plucky action star may only grow with time. She is indeed a talent to watch for. Miller may not have been the most befitting choice to helm a Terminator movie. It may have been impossible for the man not to make a satire out of it, the same way he successfully accomplished 3 years prior with the original Deadpool. Like many a critic sitting in that packed theater, I did laugh at spots whether we were supposed to or not. Perhaps we were not. Matter of fact, I still have a feeling we weren't supposed to. And yet we objectively found something about the shenanigans themselves, or a line delivery, or Arnold growing decadently cheesier with age. Hell, The entire third act manages to reach borderline Fast and Furious levels of ineptitude, culminating in a drawn-out aquatic power plant fight sequence. All of this had strangely thrown me for a loop, even if all but the original Terminator managed to squeak out one moment of hokiness that won't have shown its age at any point. Regardless, Miller still accomplishes his role more effectively than that of Alan Taylor, who helmed Genesis into unbridled drudgery. But that is still not saying much. There's a small part of me that liked Terminator Dark Fate, the shrinking part that can tolerate mindless, carb-heavy popcorn flick. Another part of me is still cringing over how brainless it is and how little it does to propel the franchise forward. And that is a shame. We still get to see Sarah Connor back on our screens, fighting for her life, for her family, for the world, against an outlandish story that starts out legitimate, but later borders on the clownish. It can still hold its own amidst the rest of the series. Though I know the possibility of saying hasta la vista for good would be much sweeter than anything else Cameron could come up with for this unique universe. That alone would be enough for me to recommend this minor time waster to those interested. Should you choose to make a purchase, remember it in the future, if and when you decide to re-embark on Cameron's Avatar hype train. Skynet and JN do not exist in her future, meaning Sarah succeeded in destroying the former after CyberDewey went defunct. However, humanity's future is threatened by another AI called Legion, originally developed for cyber warfare, which was built in Skynet's place when Legion became a threat to humans. An attempt was made to neutralize it with nuclear weapons, resulting in a nuclear holocaust and the AI creating a global network of machines to terminate the human survivors who organized a resistance movement to counter Legion's onslaughts, and Danny's destiny is linked to their war against it. Grace traces the source of Sarah's messages to Laredo, Texas, barely evading the Rev-N and the same T-800 that had killed John, having fulfilled his mission. And with Skynet no longer existing to give him further orders, the T-800 was left aimless over time. And through his adaptability, he became self-aware, learned from humanity, and developed a conscience, taking the name Carl and adopting a human family after learning how his actions affected Sarah and being able to detect the location of temporal displacements. Carl began to forewarn her of them, to give her a purpose, to make amends. Carl offers to join them against the Rev-9, and they prepare to destroy it, with Sarah begrudgingly agreeing to work together for Danny's sake. Anticipating the Rev-9's arrival, Carl bids his family farewell and tells them to escape. The group seek out a military-grade electromagnetic pulse EMP generator from an acquaintance of Sarah's. The Rev-9 catches up with them, forcing them to steal a plane to escape, though the EMP generators are destroyed in the resulting shootout during the flight. Grace reveals that Danny will become the future founding commander of the Resistance before the Rev-9 boards their airplane and temporarily subdues Carl, forcing Grace, Sarah, and Danny to parachute from the plane into a river near a hydroelectric plant, with Carl and the Rev-9 following close behind. Trapped, the group makes their stand inside the plant in the ensuing battle. Carl and Grace force the Rev-N into a spinning turbine, causing an explosion that critically damages the two Terminators. The severely damaged Rev-9 endoskeleton incapacitates Sarah, forcing Danny to confront it herself. A dying Grace tells Danny to use her power source to destroy it. Danny tries to fight the Rev-N but is quickly overpowered. Carl reactivates himself and restrains the Rev-N, allowing Danny to stab it with Grace's power source. He then drags Drez himself and the Rev-9 over a ledge before the power core explodes, destroying them both sometime. Later, Danny and Sarah watch a young Grace at a playground with her family, the former determined to avert Grace's death. And legions rise before driving off to prepare cast. See also list of Terminator characters. Linda Hamilton as Sarah Connor, the mother of John Connor, the former future leader of the human resistance in the war against Sky, now a battle-hardened senior woman and left alone after John's death. Sarah hunts and kills Skynet's remaining Terminators to prevent Judgment Day and forall the coming conflict after learning of Danny's destiny, leading a new resistance against the rogue AI Legion, and realizes her own purpose in the new timeline. She prepares Danny as she did, John Maddie Curley serves as a stunt actress, and body double for a young Sarah Connor, with CGI applied to recreate Hamilton's facial likeness from the 1990s. Opening scene, Jessie Feezer serves as a stunt actress and body double for present-day Sarah Connor Arnold Schwarzenegger as the T-800 Carl, an aging Terminator built by Skynet and one of several sent back in time to kill John after completing its mission. It gained autonomy and integrated into human society, becoming benign and later starting an emotional relationship with a woman. While raising her son, it lives in Laredo, Texas, and owns a drapery business. It later joins forces with Sarah and Grace to help protect Danny from the Rev. Although Sarah continues to hate Carl for John's death, Dark Fate marks the first film in the series where Schwarzenegger appears as the titular character, but does not receive top billing. Brett Aar serves as a body double for the young T-800 with CGI, applied to recreate Schwarzenegger's facial likeness from the 1990s opening scene. Azar reprises this role from Terminator Genesis Mackenzie Davis as Grace, an enhanced super soldier from 2042 who was previously taken in by Danny as a teenager. Grace was subsequently trained and raised by Danny. Grace is later part of a security detail for Danny, and she sustained stab wounds while fighting off a Rev 7 Terminator following the attack. She volunteers to be converted into a cyborg, augmented with robotics. She has abilities comparable to those of a Terminator for short periods of time and requires medication, nourishment, and rest. To replenish her strength, her enhanced senses and abilities allow her to detect machines such as legions before normal humans. Grace is sent to protect Danny's, though younger self from Legion's Rev 9. Stephanie Gill portrays a 10-year-old Grace Natalia Reyes as Danny Ramos, a young woman who works with her brother at an automobile assembly plant in Mexico City. Danny is being targeted for termination by the Reven. At first, Sarah believes that Danny is the resistance leader's destined mother like Sarah. However, it is revealed that Danny is fated to take on a role akin to that of Sarah's deceased son, as the Resistance's founding commander in the B War against the Machines of Legion, with Sarah as her mentor in the future. Danny sends Grace back in time to stop the Rev 9, and she instructs Grace to seek the T-800 for aid by T, towing its locations. Coordinates on her Gabriel Luna as Gabriel Rev 9, an advanced Terminator that originated from Legion and was sent back in time to terminate Danny. Featuring a traditional solid endoskeleton covered with liquid metal, the Rev 9 possesses the ability to separate these two components into two separate, fully autonomous units. Diego Boneta as Diego Ramos, Danny's brother; Tristan Aloa as Felipe Gondal, Danny's uncle; and a border coyote, Alicia Barrero, as Alicia Carl's wife; Manuel Pacific as Mato Carl's stepson; Enrique Ar as Viente, Danny's and Diego's father; Fraser James as Major Dean, a United States Air Force intelligence officer; and Sarah's acquaintance, Tom Hopper, as William Hardell, Grace's commanding officer in the Resistance; Stuart McCore's Craig Dan, and Diego's work supervisor, Stephen Cree, as Rigby, a United States Border Patrol agent, Georgia Simon. The film's ADR voice casting director provided the voice of Grace's mother. Edward Furlong as John Connor, reference, a young version of John Connor, created using CGI and motion capture. Aaron Kunitz provided the voice of young John Connor. Jude Key served ASA body double for young John Connor, onto which Furlong's facial likeness from the 1990s was applied. Earl Bowen appears as Doc Ock Silberman via uncredited archival footage from Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Production development, Tim Miller, director of Terminator Dark Fate, promoting the film. At the 2019 San Diego Comic-Con, by December 2013, Skydan Productions was planning for Terminator Genesis to be the start of a new trilogy of films. The Genesis sequels were scheduled for release on May 19, 2017 and June 29, 2018 for the second film in the plan. Trilogy actor Arnold Schwarzenegger was to reprise his role as the T-800. Terminator Genesis was produced by Skydan founder David Ellison and was released in 2015, but its disappointing box office performance stalled the development of the plan. Trilogy Dana Goldberg, the chief creative officer for Skydan, said in October, Uber 2015, that she wouldn't say the franchise is on hold so much as readjusting. According to Goldberg, despite Jess's disappointing domestic performance, the company was happy with its worldwide numbers and still intended to make new films, production of a sequel. would begin no earlier than 2016 because the company planned market research to determine its direction after Genesis. The Genesis sequels were ultimately canceled. Tim Miller and talked about Miller eventually directing a new Terminator film after completing Deadpool 2. 2018, when Miller left the Deadpool 2 project in October 2016, he took on the Terminator film as his next project, instead at the request of Miller franchise. Creator James Cameron subsequently joined the project. Cameron had directed and co-written the first two Terminator films, and Miller, through his company Blur Studio, had previously worked with Cameron. Ellison felt that Genesis could have been better, so he recruited Cameron as a fellow producer in hopes of creating a better film. Cameron was intrigued by Ellison's proposal to make a sequel to Terminator 2, Judgment Day 1991, ignoring the events of Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines, 2003, Terminator Salvation 2009, and Terminator Genesis. Cameron said, "We're pretending the other films were a bad dream or an alternate timeline, which is permissible in our multiverse." Other filmmakers on the project had suggested making the film without Schwarzenegger, but Cameron disliked the idea as he and Schwarzenegger were friends. Cameron agreed to produce the film on the condition that Schwarzenegger be involved as producer. Cameron was involved in pre-production and script work, and also provided his input on the project. Miller felt that audiences had lost hope in the franchise following the last three films. He believed that Cameron's involvement would serve as a seal of quality, which would convince fans that the franchise was going to be handled, at least in a way that the original filmmaker would want. Cameron was involved with the film as of January 2017, and Ellison was searching for a writer among science fiction authors with the intention that Miller direct later in the month. Ellison said there would be an announcement regarding the future of the franchise before the end of the year, adding that it was going to be in a direction that would provide the continuation of what the fans really wanted. Since T2.in, July 2017, Cameron said that he was working with Ellison to set up a trilogy of films and supervise them. The intention was for Schwarzenegger to be involved, but also to introduce new characters and pass the baton. Pre-production on September 12, 2017. Skydance Media confirmed that Miller would direct the new Terminator film, which was initially scheduled for release on July 26, 2019. The film's budget was approximately $15 to $196 million, or split roughly three ways between Skydance, Paramount Pictures, and 20th Century Fox, all of which were production companies for the film. Chinese company Tencent Pictures joined the project as a co-financier in April 2018, ultimately financing 10% of the budget. Tencent was a production company on the project and also handled the film's distribution, marketing, and merchandising in China. TSG Entertainment and Cameron's Lightstorm Entertainment were also involved in the production, writing before screenwriters were hired. Miller had asked that a group of novelists be consulted on how to reinvent the franchise. Among the novelists were Joe Abercrombie, Neil Asher, Greg Bear, Warren Ellis, and Neil Stephenson. Abercrombie suggested the idea of a female character who is half human and half machine, forming the origins of the character Grace, a human-machine character. Marcus Wright was previously featured in Terminator Salvation. Portrayed by Sam Worthington, the film story was conceived by Miller, Cameron, and Ellison, and a team of writers was hired to write the script. They included Charles H. Egley, David S. Goyer, and his writing partner Justin Rods, and Josh Friedman, creator of the television series Terminator. The Sarah Connor Chronicles. Cameron and the writers watched the Terminator sequels that came after his initial films. They determined that the storylines of the later films were too complex when it came to time travel. Weeks were spent working on the story, which was eventually envisioned as a new Terminator film trilogy. Goya wrote a draft for the first film in the trilogy that would ultimately become Terminator. Dark Fate. Goyer moved on to other projects by November 2017. Billy Ray was brought in to polish the script. Ray rewrote much of Goyer's draft. Miller wrote the film's action scenes while Rai handled the characters. Cameron had a list of action scenes for no particular film that he had wanted to shoot over the years. He gave this list to Miller so he could work them into Terminator Dark Fate. The list formed the basis for scenes involving a dam and a Humvee underwater as the start of filming approached. Cameron felt that the script needed improvement and made the changes himself. The film story credits were given to James Cameron, Charles Igley, Josh Friedman, David Goyer, and Justin Rod's screenplay by David Goyer. Justin Rod's and Billy Ray Cameron said that he and Miller ultimately had many disagreements about the film, but he described it as being part of the creative process. Among their disagreements was whether the human resistance would be winning or losing to Legion in the future. Miller wanted the humans to be losing, while Cameron felt differently. Miller said Legion is so powerful. The only way to beat it is going back in time and strangle it in the crib. Jim says, "What's dramatic about the humans losing?" And I say, well, what's dramatic about the humans winning? And they just need to keep on winning. I like a last stand. It's not his thing. Miller also had disagreements with Ellison. Miller said that the destruction of Cyberdyne at the end of Terminator 2, Judgment Day, is an event which would change the future, but no one knew how. And I don't think the movies that came after it really explored that in a clean way, like I believe we are with True Consequences, and it makes perfect sense for Sarah to be the one to face those consequences, since they were her choices to begin with. 65-1 consequence would be the death of John Connor, who was initially meant to become the future leader of the human resistance against machines. The decision to kill the John Connor character came from Cameron, who wanted to surprise audiences who had become invested in the character's mythology. It's like, let's just get that right off the table. Let's just pull the carpet out from underneath all of our assumptions of what a Terminator movie is going to be about. Let's just put a bullet in his head at a pizzeria in the first 45 seconds. Cameron said that John's death serves as a springboard for the story to show Sarah's ultimate trauma, from which she only begins to recover. Right at the end of the new film, she's driven by hatred, by revenge. Her badass comes from a place of deep hurt and deep pain. Miller said that he and the other filmmakers did not find the decision to kill JN controversial. Miller felt that Sarah Connor was best portrayed as an unhappy character, and he said that John's death provided a reason for her to be that way. Miller said of Sarah Connor, "Grief has made her want to be an emotionless killing machine, and at the end of the movie, she's allowing herself to care. Again, she comes back to humanity. Her shriveled heart has blocked." Again, that was the journey. However, Miller did not want Sarah Connor to be an unpleasant and unwatchable character and said, "I think Sarah is tough, but it's not uncomfortable to watch." Cameron believed that removing John Connor would prevent the film from feeling like a retread of previous films. Discarding John Connor allowed for new characters to be worked into the story. Miller said you can't have John be a 36-year-old accountant somewhere, and really, when you think about it, he could be sort of a pathetic figure as a man who had missed his moment in history and was relegated to this ordinary existence, describing the opening scene. Miller said you want to slap the audience in the face and say, "Wake up, this is going to be different." I feel like that accomplished that. I hate the violence of it. I hate the idea of a kid being shot, but the dramatic fuel that it gives the story is kind of undeniable. In the early stages of development, there was consideration given to the idea that Danny Ramos could be portrayed as John's daughter, or that she could have some other connection to the Connors. However, Miller disliked the idea that she would be related to them. There were never plans to feature John Connor in any other scenes besides the opening. Linda Hamilton was somewhat shocked by the decision to kill John Connor, which she believed would upset a lot of fans. But she also said she wanted the film series and its characters to evolve. She was pleased with the film's characters, feeling that earlier sequels to Terminator 2 lacked characters the audience would care about. Miller was dissatisfied with the final film's idea that Danny would send Grace to the past, saying, "We set up this whole story where her is just, I had a different scene in mind." Additionally, several endings were considered, including one where Sarah and Danny would bury Grace, and another where Grace's body would be burned and sent down a river eventually. Miller suggested the idea that Danny would go to see the younger Grace. The ending playground scene was a late addition to the film, Cameron devised the idea of a T-800 Terminator that is just out there in this kind of limbo for more than 20 years after carrying out an order, becoming more human in the sense that he's evaluating the moral consequences of things that he did, that he was ordered to do back in his early days, and really kind of developing a consciousness and a conscience. Cameron considered this iteration of the character to be more interesting than those featured in his first two films, saying, "We've seen the Terminator that was programmed to be bad. You've seen the one that was programmed to be good, to be a protector. But in both cases, neither one of them have free will. Schwarzenegger enjoys interior decorating. So Cameron suggested that his T-800 character in the film have a drapery business. Miller arranged the script structure to have Schwarzenegger's character appear later in the story to allow time for the three female lead characters to develop casting. By April 2017, Schwarzenegger had joined the project to reprise his role. That September, it was announced Hamilton would reprise her role as Sarah.